it on my local computer, and I think you should have a button on your side, and you should be like, okay,
Yep, clicked on OK.
perfect. So then I think we're running. So let me just kick things off, and then we can just kind of have a conversation.
Awesome, Miko. And thank you so much for having me on here. I was so psyched when I received your invitation.
Okay, hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show. And today I have an exciting episode with WhaleShark, a incredibly prolific investor in the NFT world. So, welcome to the Miko Bits show.
Miko, thank you so much for having me. Huge fan of what you've done in the space and just so excited to be talking to Miko Bits about NFTs today.
I love it. I'm so excited. So, I guess one of the really, let me ask kind of a very naive question, right? Which is my naive question is what What makes one NFT more valuable than another NFT? And I know that like there are these incredibly like simple answers, like people are wanting to have it, or like so there's lots of very simple answers, but I'd love to get kind of the way that you think about it, particularly from an investment perspective. So how do you think about like what makes one more interesting to you than another?
Miko, that is a fantastic question, not naive at all, and it's actually extremely deep. That's actually the very first time anyone has ever asked me that question, by the way.
Ah, great.
So I think on a base level, when you look at NFTs, like any other economic asset, there is the dynamic of supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at NFTs, I mean, if we're looking at it on a very superficial level, the more scarce an NFT is versus the amount of demand for that asset, essentially you are going to either see price escalation or price stagnancy, right? So that's a very economic explanation. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same as any other economic asset that you see in the market. However, when you look on a deeper level, in terms of what makes an NFT more, I guess, more valuable than another NFT, I think you can also look at it from a technological and cultural perspective as well. So if you look at it from a technological perspective, not all NFTs are created equally, right? We have different types of ERC standards, and ERC 721 being the predominant standard that we see using, the one of ones, right? The token of the one of ones. And you have other standards that make non-fungible tokens a little bit more fungible, right?
Yeah.
I believe it's ERC 1122 and all these other standards. So, the technological, I guess from a technological perspective, you have the token standards that are being used, but at the same time, you also have the amount of metadata that is being stored on chain as well, right? So the way that NFTs operate today is you might have a token with a very limited subset of metadata within that token. And there's a pointer to, let's say, a piece of artwork that's being stored on IPFS, right?
Yeah.
On the other side, you might have a token whereby the entire design or the entire aesthetic of that token is being stored on chain instead, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and all of these different things, really would determine. I mean, as an NFT aficionado, for me, the more amount of data and the more immutable something is that is stored on chain, the better, because I know that it'll never disappear, right?
Yeah.
Um, so again, it's an extremely deep question. I think you and I could probably have like a 30-minute to 1 hour conversation about all
Yeah.
of the different implications. But I would say that number one, there's a basic economic concepts of supply and demand.
Yeah.
Number two, it's about the type of token from a technological perspective that's being used to develop these NFTs. And the third one is basically the cultural, I would say the cultural relevancy to what we're seeing, in crypto versus within the mainstream itself, right? So I
Ah,
think it's
ah.
mainly those three things.
I love the idea of cultural relevancy. And I guess one of the things I'd love to ask you is kind of about the durability, right? Because I
Mhm.
think there are some things that are culturally relevant in terms of their hotness, right? Like something can be very hot. Like, for example, in my mind, something like Bored Apes is like insanely current, right?
Mhm.
But the question becomes like about things like durability. So do you look
Mhm.
at that or do you think about that? Like, because cultural relevance can be temporal, right? It can be
Mhm.
short-lived or long-lived.
Miko, I look at it all the time. It is probably one of the predominant foundations of what I look at whenever I invest in something. So I think there's no right or wrong towards investing in NFTs. However, there is a short-term horizon and a long-term horizon, right? If I had invested in Bored Apes, 1 year ago or 6 months ago, I would have made a killing if you look at the market right now.
Yeah,
However, anything that we've held in our wallets, we plan to hold for 5 years to a decade to two
amazing,
decades,
amazing.
right? And it's very difficult to understand whether or not Bored Apes is going to be culturally relevant in a decade or 2 decades from now. Um, I would say this. I think it's extremely wonderful, what Bored Apes and a lot of PFP projects are doing right now, because they create a community, right? It's almost like a community ticket to enter this amazing group. And you and I were talking about this offhand, right? If you own a Bored Apes, you're cool, right?
Yes,
Because you're in the know, right?
yes.
And you saw that during NFT NYC with all of the Bored Ape parties and everything like that. However, Miko, on the flip side, where have we seen this before? Where have we seen this ability, in the traditional world, um, where you collected items that brought you into a community, but had very little value over that? I mean, one of the decisions in terms of whether or not to go into PFP projects was me sitting down at the computer one night and going through 5 documentaries on Beanie Babies, right? Now,
Yes.
there are some striking similarities, right, when I look at that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's crypto. No one knows what's going to happen. Bored Apes might very well, moon out of the Beanie Babies orbit and become something that goes mainstream. However, versus a lot of the investors within the space, I do tend to exercise a lot more, a much more conservative mindset when I go into things. So PFPs really weren't on my radar, but at the same time, I love to see the amount of fun that everyone is having with them.
Yeah, so one project that I actually got involved in was the on-chain monkeys, right? And one of the really interesting things about on-chain monkeys is exactly kind of what you described earlier, which is that on-chain monkeys are essentially, it's a SVG, right? So
Mhm, mhm.
because of that compactness, they're able to actually store, the whole thing on chain. Obviously the name is on chain, so like, it's to me like that's a really intriguing project, and I think that the founder did a really nice job kind of putting everything into the on-chain format.
Absolutely, Miko. And those on-chain monkeys, they will never disappear. As long as Ethereum exists, your on-chain monkeys will forever exist. Very similar. Do you see the avatar that I'm using today is actually from one of the very first projects that used on-chain SVG, which is called Avastars, being
Oh,
run by
wow.
Jimmy from NFT 42. Yeah. This is actually Avastars number 63. So, I think it's fascinating, right? The use of avatars or on-chain avatars as a means of identity. This is probably one of the most famous avatars within the NFT space. So I think there are use cases, but do I believe that one day we are going to sell this avatar for $50 million? Maybe when a project gets hot, but 2 decades, 3 decades later, people might just say, hey, that's just a profile pic, right? So, I have no idea where the market is going with PFPs. But again, I think it's amazing what PFPs have done to be able to create this, cool community around NFTs and around people who are interested in the blockchain.
Yeah, I think that it's super intriguing to kind of contemplate, right? Because when you're talking about avatars, right? Like the thing that I think is novel is the idea that you're selling an avatar for 50 million, right? In a sense, kind of has to do with this idea of having a piece of history, right? So in a sense, like, if the avatar is used to create history, then it can be like, I think, really interesting and valuable. So I don't know what your perspective is around ownership of historical artifacts.
Miko, I agree with you. And I think we are seeing a growth in I guess, the archaeology, if we can say that, the archaeology of NFTs, right? We saw Mooncats.
Yes.
We saw a bunch of other projects, just Moon, and a lot of other founders of original projects try to bring their projects to the front, right? I would say that's happened over the last 4 to 6 months. Um, you know, So there's two things here. So I think firstly, from a sentimental and emotional standpoint, we're all crypto nerds. We love crypto, we love the blockchain, we love NFTs. And having a portion, if I could have the very first, ENS or ENS domain, I'd jump at it in a second, right? Because I think we all love the technology and the technological field that we're in. So I think there's that, right? But at the same time, I think on the flip side, there is the question that we need to ask ourselves from an investment perspective, in 10 years down the road, how attractive would this be to the larger market, right? To the larger
Yeah.
market and the mass market when you say, hey, for example, this is the very first SVG avatar, right? That ever
Yeah.
got put on the blockchain. How
Wonderful.
many people would resound with that, right? So I think it's two different things. I think again, we're blockchain nerds. We love it. We love everything to do with the blockchain. But from an investment perspective, we just have to be very careful in understanding that the current market is mainly driven by crypto money, right? That's why there's a certain preference there, and that preference that crypto money has versus what the preference that mass market money has might be a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned recently that the Human One art by Beeple was sold by Christie's, right? And I think it
Mhm.
was, you said 25 million?
Yep, 25 million hammer price, I believe. Yep.
Yeah, so actually, Jihan from Kinetic basically insisted that I go see this, right? So I did. I went down to 20 Rockefeller, and I just kind of went in there, got my appointment, and I went to see this, and I must say that like it really is an incredible testament, and I think one of the things that I got out of this is, in a way, I got this feeling about grinding, right? Which is that
Mhm.
people talk a lot about Axie Infinity, right? And Axie is a game that involves a lot of grinding, right? And so the thing that's amazing to me is that I've kind of come to the conclusion that grinding is sort of a proof of devotion, right? And because it kind of has the quality of being laborious, right? And so
Mhm.
in a way, the impression that I got of this art, and everyone should just go to like YouTube and type in human_one, ONE, spell it out, and then Beeple, and they can see this video of this art piece. Because I highly recommend you go see it. Uh, it's an incredibly laborious piece of art. Like the producing it took a lot of effort. So I think in a way that was the impression that I came away with. It's a labor of love for sure.
Miko, I completely agree with you. And when you look at what we call the grind, I mean, people has been grinding for decades, right? Prior to launching Human One, I mean, he was doing a piece a day, and he probably has thousands upon thousands of pieces, which have ultimately culminated in his success today. And I believe that is representative of a lot of artists within the space over the last year, Miko. I do not know how many times I've had messages or DMs come in from artists and say, WhaleShark, I don't really usually talk about this, but because it's such a financial milestone for me, I've just become a millionaire, right? So many artists, I can't even count the number of artists who have become millionaires on my
Yes.
fingers anymore. But it's really debunking the previous traditional dynamic of the starving artist, right? Artists are now becoming millionaires during their lifetime. They're not only becoming millionaires through the primary sales of what they're selling, they're
Yeah.
also becoming millionaires due to the secondary sales and forced royalties that are
That's
baked into the
beautiful.
smart contracts, right?
That's beautiful.
Um,
Yes.
that's amazing. And the amazing thing about these guys is they're getting to a certain level, they're getting into financial stability, but then after that, they're taking their money and they're buying other art from other crypto artists, right?
Yeah.
So I
I
think
love that.
you and I talked about sustainability, right? And durability of NFTs. Art is just one of those sectors where you see this virtuous cycle of number one. So a virtuous cycle of a couple of things happening. The first thing is that there's a shift of capital investment for
Yeah.
digital art or NFT art from just pure crypto into the mainstream. The second thing that you're seeing the enrichment of existing artists, which allow them to spend more time on creating high value art pieces to
Yeah.
release. And the
Yeah.
third thing that you're seeing is that when these artists are actually accruing wealth, they are directly investing a subset of that wealth into more art. An amazing virtuous cycle, my friend.
I love that. I mean, to me, the thing that's so interesting is that you can actually develop a quotient that really relates to the Keynesian accelerator, right? Which is you
Mhm.
can actually kind of look at this numerically and say, well, what is the likely percentage of generated wealth that's kind of redirected through the ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
So, in
Mhm.
a sense, like it is sort of the birth of this kind of Keynesian accelerator within digital asset metaverse, especially around the arts community. So, I think that's a truly a beautiful statement and something that I think is, I hadn't really considered. So, I really appreciate that.
It's amazing. And then again, when we talk about durability, I mean, the main thing for me, and just bring this back to the original conversation that we were having with durable NFTs, what makes more NFT more valuable than another one? It's really mainly about looking at number one, it's wonderful that all this money during this crypto bull run, we see a significant portion of that money being put in to NFTs. But at the same time, I would ask all investors, and I know that you have a huge audience of investors on your show, really looking at, you know, it's not about what's going to escalate in value in 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Or it's more about thinking about, hey, what happens if I buy an NFT asset? I am not pressured to sell it at any point in time. And what's going to escalate most in a decade or 2 decades, while at the same time understanding that the NFT market is a little bit, and I know people hate to hear this, but it's not a little bit, it's very much coordinated with the wealth that's generated in the crypto market, right?
Yes.
So what
Yes.
happens when we go into a bull? What happens when we go out from this bull run and enter a bear run, right? You want to be insulated.
Yeah, I love the kind of thought process, right? Because for me, we're effectively recapitulating the historical Renaissance, right? And that
Mhm.
the thing that I think is so interesting is that we're doing it upside down, right? Which is that in the historical Renaissance, basically the Catholic Church maintained a monopoly on this kind of idea of the development of wealthy sovereigns, which
Mhm.
were monarchs, right? And the monarchs
Mhm.
were kind of like coronated, right, through this ritual. So to me, that's very interesting. But if you actually look at what's happening now, what's happening is almost like this revenge of the nerds, right? Where like nerds have taken technology and basically, it basically created a self-sovereign class, right? And the self-sovereign class is, the good news is it's open, right? Which is that anyone can join this class of the self-sovereign, right? And one of the most recent developments that I'm excited about is effectively that Axie Infinity has declared time ownership to be sovereign, right? So that creates a completely new class of potential sovereigns, and one of the really magic things that you've demonstrated that I think is really powerful is that I think that we already have seen the first billionaire time investor, which is someone
Mhm.
who started with nothing but their time, and I
Mhm.
would say I would argue that that is Metakovan, right? I would argue that
Yep.
like he started with like his own time and he just started investing his time, and so I think this is a really amazing story, and from my perspective, like this is really a huge phase change in kind of human society. So I'd love to kind of get your perspective. I think your perspective on durability is so interesting too.
Absolutely. So you talked about sovereignty, right? So when you look at sovereignty, I think the first thing is that NFTs as a proof of social standing and as a proof of social inclusion is something that we're going to see continue forward, right, into the space. Why do people buy, Bored Apes? Why do people buy, CryptoPunks? Why do people buy any of these things? Is because if you own it and if you put it as your profile pic, it's a proof of social standing and a proof of social inclusion. I am within the blockchain space. I am within the NFT space. I am an OG, and I'm also filthy rich, right?
Yes.
I think that's one aspect of it. I mean, but there are so many ways to do this. I mean, when you talk about Axis Infinity, and I'm very lucky because I have a very close friend who's Chief, right? Who's huge in the Axie community. He and I work
Yeah.
very closely together. He introduced me in. He helped me select 3 axes, and I
Yeah.
went to battle it out as well. But
I love it.
imagine to the point where let's say you have an axis with 4 mystics, and for four mystic traits, and you put that within your profile pic, dude, you've just essentially established your standing as, one of the richest investors within the Axie community, right? So I think all of these NFTs, and this was talked about a very long time ago, whether that is PFPs, whether that's gaming assets, whether it's digital art, and you see everybody using these as profile pics, they really are a part of making that social standing that's minting the new sovereign, and apologies, I'm using air quotes, but the
Yeah.
sovereign rulers of the blockchain space. So I think that's a very valid point, and I think that's just simply amazing. Um, you know, Moving forward, I think what you'll see is we really do have to take a look at, again, what is mainstream going to look at in terms of what what really determines sovereignty, right? Within the marketplace itself. So, while we all think that the market has developed extremely well over the last couple of months, I still think we have a long way to go, Miko. But yeah, I think, again, to sovereignty, I fully agree with your point, and I think it's just going to be epic as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, part of this thesis around the kind of like recapitulation of the historical Renaissance is that we are seeing the rise of the power of skilled guilds, right? So I think that we are seeing now this kind of like crafting guilds. We're seeing like skilled player guilds like Yield Guild, right? So I think that
Uh-huh.
this is a really interesting kind of emergence, right? Because in a sense, like what's happening is that we're seeing the assertion of kind of sovereign powers that are based on skill set, right? So in a
Mhm,
way, the thing that I think is magic about this is that like, it turns out that there's maybe a different kind of power law distribution of kind of the sovereignty value of a specific time, as filtered through the skill, right? So the thing
mhm,
that's so funny when you think about grinding, right, is that in some ways grinding is filtered through skill, right? So for example, if
mhm,
you're grinding axes,
mhm,
you could
mhm,
probably spend the same amount of time grinding axes as Beeple spent creating his first 5,000 days of art, right? But like,
mhm, mhm.
clearly the total value of what Beeple could do is probably higher, right? Because, it's filtered through this kind of realization of this kind of self-actualized artist, right? So to
Mhm.
me, one of the things I think is very interesting about your discussion about belonging, right, is that I think all of this can be viewed from the perspective of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mhm,
right? Which is
mhm,
that
mhm.
the thing that's so amazing about what's happening with grinding axes is that while the players may not be self-actualized by grinding axes, they're actually dealing with the lowest layer needs. Like they're feeding themselves, they're feeding their
Yep.
families, right? So they're providing kind of economic security, which is sort of the foundational layer of this hierarchy. So I think to me, these are very interesting musings in context of this hierarchy of needs, right? Because I think one of the needs that you're pointing out is how important NFTs are in the belonging layer, right? Which is
Mhm,
already,
mhm,
once you've dealt with subsistence, then you move up this layer and you're now able
mhm.
to address like, where's my tribe, right?
Miko, I mean, to your point on the grind, but before we talk on the point, I fully agree with you on the grind, by the way. And there's so many ways to grind in this place, in the space, right? It's about grind to earn, it's about play to earn,
Yes.
right? But
Yes.
before I talk about that, I mean, when you look at Axes, I mean, we all understand that a significant amount of the player base is from the Philippines, is from Vietnam, and a lot of these developing nations.
Yes.
How many Twitter posts have you seen whereby Axie players within the Philippines have answered that base layer of food, shelter, and clothing, and have
Yes.
gone on to open up their own stores and
Yes.
to pay homage to Axes, have actually developed their store banners in the color palette of Axes, and also put their thanks to Axes, right? It's amazing, dude. It's simply amazing. I mean, it basically, people are able to trade up the hierarchy of needs by grinding and by playing to earn. To your point on grinding and playing to earn, there are so many ways to grind, right? So we look at Beeple, and the way that he grinds is by creating. how about all those people who, and I don't own any CryptoPunks, right? I wish I did grind very earlier on, but
Yeah,
how about all those people that grinded to understand what CryptoPunks was, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and grinded to pick up and mint, right? The very first CryptoPunks, they grinded as well. Grinding from, there's so many ways to grind the space. I mean, grinding from my perspective, there was a point in time, and people think that it's overnight. I collected every single art piece, but I literally was looking at every single art piece that entered the space from November 2019 all the way to March of 2020. Every single day, Miko, first thing I did, open
I
up
love it.
Maker's Place, super rare, known origin, and I went through hundreds, if not
I love
thousands of
it.
art
I love
pieces
it.
on a day-to-day basis, right? There's the grind. It is possible. It is possible to become sovereignty, right? And I'm just using air quotes here.
Yep.
It is possible to become sovereignty if you are willing to put in the time to grind. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, it's something that hits you in the face when you're looking at people's art, right? Is
Mhm.
absolutely the amount of devotion, right? Because one of the things I've observed is that every major world religion actually has a grind mechanic, right? It has
Mhm.
some, and that the grind mechanics are driven by mechanism discovery and they're driven by hopium, right? So in a
Mhm.
way, like what causes grinds to be meaningful, right? But the thing that I think is so lovely about this as a model for sort of the future of work is that I believe that the creator economy is a bit of a destination. And what I
Mhm.
mean by it's a destination is that in a way, when you look at grinding Xe, it's sort of a more kind of transitional, I would call it a consumer model, right? In the sense that like obviously there's breeding and there's kind of
Mhm.
this kind of relationship that you develop with your pets, and so I think that's kind of something that's pretty special. But I would say that in the long run, people will convert their non-fungible time and conviction and energy and skill, into the production of non-fungible assets, right? And that kind of closes the loop. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Miko, you are so spot on this, and I'm absolutely loving this conversation because I've never had conversation of this depth with anybody else before. Dude, when you look at the high flying projects today, right? All of those projects are actually, a lot of them are from people who grinded in CryptoKitties. I don't know if you know this or not, right? So when you look at some of the largest NFT companies in the space, a lot of them had their kickoff from being in CryptoKitties. I mean, let me just give you an example. Jimmy,
Yeah.
who runs NFT 42,
Yeah.
and they're behind a lot of the infrastructural plays that you see within the space. He was a moderator with CryptoKitties, right? Nate Alex, who's done Squigglies and all these other projects, right? Also an OG CryptoKitties thing. I think there's a group. I mean, wow. I mean, when I think about it, I mean, Go West. When you look at NBA Top Shots, naturally Dapper. I mean, Dapper
Yeah.
grounded it through
Yep.
through CryptoKitties as well.
Yep.
I think you and I are advantageous in the fact that you and I get exposure to a lot of the founders and people in the space, right? When you hear about the story behind Animoca and all of these other,
Amazing.
right? All of the, they're all tied into the fact that the major companies that you see that are valued in the billions today from an
Yeah.
NFT perspective grounded out in 2017, 2018,
This I love.
2019. And dude, I mean, you know a lot of the founders of these projects as well. They
Yeah.
emerged from CryptoPunks, CryptoKitties, and all of these other, OG projects. And there were projects that succeeded, there were projects that failed, but they learned a significant amount. To your point, they acquired a certain skill set, right?
Yeah.
From those success or failures, and were able to do the things that they do today.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I was on a call with a DeFi Alliance call with Jiho from Axie this morning, and he was showing the growth curve, right? And of course it's like this, right? It's like duh, and then like whoa, like it went like vertical, right? And the thing that I loved about what his comment was he actually pointed at the flat part and he said this was the important part of
Yep.
this, right? Which is amazing, right? Because that's a long stretch where nothing seems to be happening, and it's not like so one of the great comments someone asked me the other day, they were like how can what's your advice on becoming an overnight success in crypto, right? And my comment was, you know, you should find a really thankless and harsh business, like for example, like open source developer tools, and you should spend maybe 20 or maybe free to play gaming or mobile gaming. There's tons of them, right? But there are many industries that are kind of now like metaverse adjacencies. Even VR has been like a grind, right? And so if you just if you're forged in the fires of this kind of adversity, right? That's a very protracted grind, right? And so what I said to this person I was like, so yeah, so just do that, and then like the rest of it's really easy.
Correct.
So
I mean, it's all relative, right, Miko? I mean, I like to say, I mean, my grind, Miko. I mean, so the first thing is this. Look, fully agree with you. I think a lot of people look at things and they see a growth in 1 year, right? Like they see
yeah,
exponential growth in 1 year.
yeah,
And to your point, they ask, how did you become an overnight success, right?
yeah.
And to Jiho's point, honestly, the success didn't come within that 1 year. It
Oh
was the
yeah,
5 years behind that, right?
oh yeah, oh
Um,
yeah.
my grind was in Japan when I worked in Japan for 3 years, right? Straight out of
Amazing.
college, companies dropped me in Japan, and I grinded for 3 years within that corporate context. And
Wow.
where did the success come from? It came from a long, long time before. But Miko, I mean, to your point, I think what we are going to see is because so many people are now grinding it out, right? Or grinding it out in other projects, that can only lead birth to additional projects in the future. The crypto gaming space and the blockchain gaming space has blown up because of a single game, which is Axie Infinity.
Yeah.
What happens when we have the next 5 to 6 Axie Infinity, right? And whether that's being birthed directly out of Axies or whether that's being birthed out of people who played Axies, dude, I mean, it just bodes so well for the space as we move forward.
I think one of the comments I would love to add, in the context of you kind of being in Japan, right? Like in Japan, there's kind of this idea of like the Gambaru culture, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
I kind of translate as sort of bravely producing effort, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
Gambaru is basically grinding, right? Like that's basically what it is. And to me, the thing that's so interesting is that when you look across sort of Pan-Asian culture, right, there's actually quite a bit of like Confucian philosophy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Confucius was like a grinder. Like that guy knew grinding, right? So when you think about Asian parents and you think about the stereotypes of like the
Yep.
tiger moms and this kind of thing, like, like you're gonna study for your exams. I mean, I swear you're going to, right? And it's no surprise to me, right? Because when you look at like, on the flip, like there's 2.7 billion gamers worldwide, like
Mm-hmm.
54% of those are in Asia, right? And when you kind of look at the crypto numbers, right? The crypto numbers, there's actually 130 million kind of people in crypto blockchain in Asia alone, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely dominant over any other region, right? So it's kind of not too surprising to see something like an Axie, being born in Vietnam and then spreading to like the Philippines. And the thing, it turns out the number three country in Axie Infinity is actually
Mm-hmm.
Japan of all places. It's sort of
Wow. Okay.
Philippines, US, and then Japan. It's very strange, but but it's definitely like there's sort of an Asian center to some of this stuff. It's quite interesting.
I think you're right. I mean, and for the viewers who are not aware of Japanese work culture, it is very much Gambaru culture, right? I mean, you get up at 7, try to get to the office around 8. Then after that, you have chore and you have everything like that. Then after that, you grind the entire day through meetings, grind till like everyone's supposed to leave at 6, but you stay till 8, but you really stay till 10. Then after that, you go out and you bond with your colleagues, and by the time you get back, it's 1. You go to sleep and you do it all over again, right? You have that culture there. And the thing is, I also was able to work in China for 5 years.
Oh
And
wow.
I mean, after coming from the Japanese work culture and going to China, the Chinese, they grind, right? They literally
Yes.
every single day. It's insane. I mean, wow, it's not only, at least in Japan, I got Saturday and Sundays off. In
Yeah.
China, now you're looking at getting to the office by 9, going home at 12, and doing that 7 days a week, literally.
Yes.
So I think there is something to be said. Again, is it psychologically healthy? I'm not sure. But Miko, it totally changed me. And I'm Western educated, as you can tell from my accent, right? I
Yeah.
educated in the UK, educated from the US.
Yeah.
I went to Asia and I was like, what the hell is this? Right? Where's my work-life balance? And
Yeah.
work-life balance turned into work-life integration. Probably like a lot of your viewers and yourself, very fortunate not to have to work anymore, but simply because of those, that decade or decade and a half of indoctrination of Asian work culture. I work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, right? It's I don't know what it is, bro, but just by doing that, it's also provided me the skill set to be able to just focus for that amount of time. And to your point, just grind through the space, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's really amazing that you're kind of featuring this kind of thought process because this has definitely been, I think Axie being a kind of a grindish game, like it's definitely brought this strongly to the forefront in terms of my thinking, right? But it's really fascinating to kind of reflect on kind of the underlying cultural aesthetics and values, right? Because so I think that's been an amazing thing to unpack through this. I think for me, one of the things I think of when I think of the future of work, which is a topic that came up during the YGG strategy session in New York, which is the
Mm-hmm.
future of work to me is absolutely that creator economy impulse because it is about working for the delight of your community or
Mm-hmm.
working for the delight even of just a single other person, right? But in a way, I think that becomes something that's durable and sustainable. And it's something where if you have a proof of devotion, you can create delight, right? So in a sense, you can work even harder than you've ever worked, if you're sufficiently devoted, right? So so to me, right now, I'm really trying to work in such a way with my portfolio companies, so I really
Mm-hmm.
want to kind of be in service and try to kind of help them achieve their dreams, right? Because I think that's kind of like kind of how you can pay it forward. So I think that in the long run, I think that the old model that's kind of more based on an extractive, exploitative work culture
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where all you want to do is just stop, right? You just want to collapse and be over with and just be like, I'm done. Like I don't want to work another day. I think that may give way to kind of a culture where work shifts, and assuming that people can realize their own Abraham Maslow's hierarchy and they can fulfill up to the self-actualization. Once they reach that point, then I think that it becomes more about a kind of delight and service, right? It becomes more about like, helping others and having all of the hardship be made worthwhile through
Mm-hmm.
that practice.
I think you bring up a really interesting topic because when you think about work and the way that it has changed over the last 3 years, I want to say 3 years, there are a bunch of dynamics that we're looking at, right? The first thing is where you work, right? When you
Yeah.
think about what COVID did to everybody,
Oh
and
my
and this
God.
is I'll get there. I mean, it's like a culmination of all these different dynamics. And honestly, when I look at all these dynamics, kudos to yourself as well as the YGG team, by the way, because I haven't even given this much thought yet. But when you look at all of the different trends that are going on, number one, where you work,
Mm.
you no longer work from an office, right? I kind of miss putting on a suit, but kind of not. You work from home, you work from a coffee shop, you work from a WeWork, you work from, you work wherever you want to work, right? So that's the first dynamic that you're seeing. And a second dynamic that comes from where we work comes to when we work, right?
Yeah.
So, do you really work a 9 to 5 anymore? Not
Ha.
really. My team at Whale, sometimes I'll ping them and say, hey, we need to get this done. I'll see that they have the mobile sign on, and they'll tell me, hey, I'm outside hanging out with friends, or I'm doing this. I'll do it when I come back. Hey, I don't want to work from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. I want to work from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. I want to go to the gym in the afternoon. Then I promise I'm going to work on this stuff from 6 o'clock in the evening to 12 o'clock at night. Right.
Yep.
So when we work, and then to your point, how we work, right?
Yeah.
And why we work, right? I think those
Yes.
are those are the second two. Those are the two other dynamics that are coming in. And I guess the final point is, how are we compensated for the way that we work? Because when you look at how people are compensated in Web 3.0, it's no longer about a monthly salary, right?
Yes.
it's token drops, it's equity share, it's all these other different dynamics where now you not only get to do what you love, but you also get to be paid really, really, really well for it as well, right? So I think those 5 different dynamics is going to change the thought process of employment as we see it. Last point I would make, Miko, is that I think a predecessor to seeing the success of Axes and the success of what we saw from blockchain was the commercialization of people saying, I can play games and get paid for it because esports is really a thing,
I
right?
love that.
I mean, it's changed. All the dynamics are changing now. Where that dynamic is going to lead to, not sure, but I'm quite sure it's going to be a much more fun world when all of the dust settles and all of these dynamics has played through.
That's a beautiful framing, right? Because the thing that's really shocking is like I'm pretty atrociously bad at like kind of reflex-based gaming, so I'm mechanically, like I'm pretty old, right? So when I play like League of Legends, like I like really low skill cap, like I like tanks because they can like, they're just they don't die in before I can even react, so they have a thick health bar, so like for me, the thing that's so funny about being so mechanically challenged, right, is that the way you framed esport, right, is that in a way you could look at Axie as like a long tail esport with professionals, right? So like it's sort of like, oh, so there's 2 million professional esports athletes that suit up and play Axie every day, right? Like those are all professionals, right? And that's beautiful. That's entertaining to me.
Miko, bro, I don't know if you know this, but I'm also the very first sponsor of the very first professional esports team within Axis itself. I actually sponsored Axie GG. So Axie GG is the very first esports team that I've actually formally sponsored, along
I
with
love
Chief.
it.
To your point, I with age, I'm no longer young myself. With age, I've become mechanically challenged as well. So I mean, for me, it's hey, I'm going to play Axis
Yeah,
or I'm going to play Gods Unchained, right? Which is the equivalent
that's
of
great.
Hearthstone, right?
Yeah.
No matter how young you might be, I'm still going to be able to move my brain, right?
Yes.
So, over the last month, and this is extremely very timely because over the last month, we not only signed Axie GG, we also signed Infinite Mana, which used to be known as Team Mythic
Yeah.
from Gods Unchained. So again, love the space, love the new dynamic of what it means to work, love the dynamic in terms of what it means to earn, right? And I think this is going to be a thing, right? I think it's just, you talked about a grind, right, Miko? It's the
Yes.
time to grind on play to earn, the time to grind on esports is now, right? And 3 years down the road, people will be asking, how did you become an overnight success, right? It's the same cycle.
Yeah, I love this. And to me the thing that's so amazing is when we see the highest end of professional athlete, and whether it be an esports athlete or even the Olympics or anything else, right? Like really we are seeing the culmination of the proof of a devotion, right? Which is when you see the highest end of professional athletics, right? There's no question that there was a grind, right? Like nobody gets that good without like just the amount of practice that becomes painful, right? Like that person overcame their aversion to like much more of this than any normal person would take as a dose, right? Like people like, oh, I really like to play League of Legends, right? It's sort of like, do you really? Like can you play like, for like 12, 15 hours a day, in solo queue for like a year or 2 years, like, can you do it? Right. And like, most people, the level of grind is, excessive. It's extreme.
It is. I mean, just look at the top players. Just look at the top players within Axis, right? We'll just bring it back to Axis again. I mean, when you look
Yeah.
at Bryson, when you look at Indes, how many hours a day do you think they play? It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. The nature of the grind is just, again, to your point, the grind is just about to get more fun, right?
Yeah.
It's about making sure, and bringing it back to a conversation about the space of NFT as a whole. There is so much for anyone who is interested in anything. If you want to play games, blockchain games, if you want to do, to your point, we brought up off camera, talking about yield farming, right?
Yes.
If you're a finance nut and you want to do yield farming, it's so easy now to look at, a lot of these a lot of these decentralized exchanges make it so easy to do yield farming nowadays. Just pick your poison, right? If you want to create, and if you want to be a creator, grind it like Beeple. There's anything for anyone and for everyone within the space. And to your point, the basis of that overnight success, again using air quotes with my finger, is the
Yeah.
grind, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I love this kind of feeling, right? Because when you said choose your poison, like that is really the magic, actually. That's the magic, right? Which is that to me, I literally do mean it when I say that a grind is a proof of devotion, right? And the thing that's beautiful about what's kind of erupting into the space is that there are more and more and more things that you can choose to be devoted to, right? And
Yep.
so in a, like, obviously when we talk about, like, one of the things I learned in League of Legends is that, I was watching this pro trainer, and he said, like, figure out what your joy is, right? And if your joy is like a Mumu 5-man ulti, or if your joy is, like, I don't know, hitting your hook from across the map or whatever, like whatever your joy is, whatever you're like, oh my God, that was so awesome. Like, figure that out. And if you can figure it out in crypto blockchain, that's probably even better for you, but
Yep.
I would say that, like, if you can just figure out what makes you tick, right, it becomes easier for you to grind, right? Because, and for me, this idea of kind of the service and the delight of the other is kind of like it's a bit like a drug, it's a
Mhm.
thing that pulls you into a grind mode, right? So you're kind of like, okay, I'm gonna suit up. Like, I'm gonna suit up because X, right? Like, like one of the things I learned in, like, the military is that a lot of times it's actually just your unit, right? It's just like, I'm doing this for this group of people, right? These people
Yep.
are, and so you got to find that purpose, right? Because I think that, really, like, the grind is something inescapable, right? So in a sense, you should choose your poison, and have at it. But for me, I think the way you unlock that is, what you're doing is you're proving your devotion. And, in a way, the magic trick to it is finding your devotion, right?
Yep.
Finding something you're willing to kind of, like, pour yourself into, and if you find that it's too much, then, like, maybe pop your head up and look around and see if there's something else you can grind.
Miko, but to your point, I mean, 2 points here. I mean, the first point, when you talked about community and having your brothers and sisters in arms by your side, right, and coming out there, when you really look at the inflection point of when Axis became popular, I believe it was very much a community-driven effort. It was
Yes.
scholarships, wasn't it?
Yes.
Without scholarships, we would
Yes.
not be seeing the growth of Axis today.
Yes. It's
Now,
beautiful.
where did we see scholarships come from? Scholarships was basically ultimate devotion by large axes holders that were able to share their axes with other people so that they could start playing as well, right? All of these things, I mean, it is community devotion. And when you look at the axes community as a whole, again, it's extremely community driven. And if you look at any single successful blockchain project that has continued to grow to new heights, I would say it's 99%. And I'm just, in real life, I'm raising my head and rolling my eyes right now to think through, all of the projects that have succeeded. The strongest projects are those with the strongest communities. Strong community, strong NFT, strong results from what I'm seeing, right?
Yeah, and I feel like, to me, reacting to the word community too, right? Which is that, I absolutely agree with you. And I think if you point at something like Axie, right, you have to tie community to devotion. You have to tie it to culture. You have to tie it to something that is very kind of human, right? Because I think that one of the dangers around the word community is that, like, one of the ways it's being used is it's being used as kind of like people who will buy your token and then shill it,
Mm-hmm,
right? So,
mm-hmm,
like,
mm-hmm.
in a way, there's a cynical vibe around the word community, where there's a community manager who's sort of like the king of token shilling, right? And I think what you and I are talking about with something like Xe is we are actually talking about a brotherhood, a sisterhood, like a family, like a,
Yep.
caring and, like, devotion, and
I mean,
that's the beating heart of it. And even all the way down to the layer that Jiho was talking about, which is even down to the layer of an affection for your pets, right? Which is
yep.
amazing. And that layer isn't a trick. And the reason why I don't think it's a trick is is because Masamune is basically putting his love into the art, right? So
Mhm,
in a
mhm.
way, like when you are attracted to these pets, it's like in part because of that original like devotion, right? Which is the original devotion to make something that's like attractive and to make it so like beautiful and interesting.
I agree with you. I mean, you hop into any Discord, you're gonna have, and sorry, I wish my avatar could move my hands, but I'm doing air quotes again. When you
Ah,
look at PFP projects that say that some projects, right, that say they have a community, basically to your point, that community is mainly about shilling and trying to get a higher
yes.
price floor and stuff like that. That's not a community. A
Pump and dump
community is
group.
pump and dump group. Exactly. That's not a community. And to your
Yes.
point, that has become,
Yes.
that has become the de facto, unfortunately, of many
Yes.
communities
Yeah.
within the space. I run one of the largest NFT communities in the space with Whale Community, right?
Yeah.
But they hardly ever talk about the token, right? They talk about what projects are coming up. What are the dynamics of the DAO? What is this? What is that? It's not about the token price. Um, Last point to your pick your poison. I think you know you don't the other beautiful thing about blockchain, about NFTs, and I think this is represented by you and myself both, is that you don't need to pick one poison, right? I'm quite
Yeah.
sure,
Yes.
knowing your background and my background, we get up one day, we're going to be talking to smaller projects about angel investing. One day we're going to be talking to projects about an IEO or an ICO. On another point, we're going to be collecting NFTs. On another point, we're going to be working DeFi. It's a dream job, Miko. I mean, we get
Yeah.
up every single day and we can do like 20 different things.
Yeah, that is really amazing. And in a way, like I've been thinking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And in a way, the thing that's so interesting is that we're working on the architecture of freedom, and freedom is really having choices, right? Having so many choices and being able to navigate. I mean, Meta Kovan said beautifully that crypto is the new America, right? And my spin on that is this idea that America used to be the place where people just took off to when they were sick of
Yep.
wherever it was that they were, right? And so in a way,
Mm-hmm.
America produces this feeling of like I can always just go there, right? And
Yep.
crypto is it has that same feeling of like I can go there. And the thing that's beautiful about it is that it isn't even, as you pointed out, a singular there, right? It's thousands of places that you can go, right? And the great thing is that then you can move, and the movement between these places is the pursuit of happiness, right? So to me, I,
Yep.
I go back to Thomas Jefferson, and I actually think the pursuit of happiness and liberty, I think life is just life, but I think that liberty and the pursuit of happiness are like they're really just the two sides of the coin, and that's the endeavor.
Absolutely. But to your point, how do you get there? Ultimately, a lot of people understand. And again, it's more difficult in these early days, right? More difficult because you have to understand a tiny bit about blockchain. You have to understand how to operate a MetaMask. You have to understand, what are blocks? How do you send a transaction, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, that is the grind, right? That really
Yes.
is the grind, right? It's
Yes.
grinding to understand what the blockchain is. How do I function within the blockchain? And once you get that base knowledge, essentially the world or the new America becomes your oyster. And if you're interested in finance, go to DeFi. If you're interested in gaming, go to NFT gaming. If you're interested in art, go to digital art. There are so many avenues. If you're interested in angel investing and VC, dude, it's my deal flow. There's never been a greater time to manage a deal flow, right? Ever. I mean, Miko, I can't imagine what your email box looks like, but the opportunities are it's amazing, right? And there are all these amazing founders who did the grind, whether in this
Yes.
industry or the last
Yes.
industry,
Yes.
have
Yes.
a
That's
great
what we
idea of how
that's what
they're
we
going to
love.
revolutionize everything. Absolutely, my friend.
Yes, yes. That's a beautiful note. And, to me, like, I really do, I think, both Whale Shark and myself, like, we do sit in a very advantaged location. But, like, to me, like, I think that this framework is one in which people who are applying themselves can, like, incredibly be quickly transcendent, and they can absolutely kind of make something astonishing, of themselves. And I think Metacovan is a beautiful
Mhm,
example.
mhm.
And
Yep.
I think that the all of the things happen. I think within YGG we're going to see billionaire time investors coming out of all kinds of places. So I think the take home that I would love to people to have is it's really essential to perform the grind, and to really start deciding whether this place is your place. And I think most people can come here and make it into their own place.
I couldn't have stated it any better, my friend. I mean, 2 years ago, to bring it to Metacoven, 2 years ago, if you had told me that Metacoven was going to run a art-based rave in the middle of, of NYC with a fully packed house, and I did, while I wasn't able to go there myself, but I did see the videos, it looked off the hook. I mean, Dreamverse looked completely off the hook. And when we look back at this, Nico, and when we look at this right now, this is just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
This is just the beginning. What does NFT NYC look like next year? What does NFT Land in Las Vegas look like in March? What does Token 2049 look like in Singapore in May? Right, dude. This is, again, I think this is just the beginning. You and I, we talked on this off screen, but you and I are finally cool to some extent.
Yeah, the nerds from high school.
The nerds from high school have the Revenge of the Nerds part 4 now. Revenge of the NFT nerds. But yeah, I think back to your point on community. We found our community, right? We found our
Yeah.
community, and we love what we do. And the grind is a grind of love. It's not a grind of sweat and tears anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's definitely for those who are in the phase where it looks very flat and you're grinding, like, that is the phase that
Yep.
Jiho pointed out as being the most important phase, right? So if you're grinding and you're not seeing this kind of exponential rise, like, hang in there, like you're doing it, like you were doing it. So, like, that's a message. That's a good message.
You guys will look back, and to Jiho's wise words, you will find that this was that grind, or that stagnancy, and that dedication and devotion was the most important time during your career. Fully agree with
Yeah.
you, Miko.
And I think just the last twist, right, which is that there are some people in crypto that have gotten kind of insanely lucky. Like they bought like Shiba, and then for no reason at all it went kind of bananas. And it turns out that what's happening on crypto Twitter with a lot of these people is that they're kind of actually unhappy.
Mhm.
Right. And so to me, one of the really incredible things that comes out of a grind is that when you do kind of make it, like, it feels a lot better, to be honest, right? What you learn isn't life is random, right? That's not what you learn. Like, what you learn
Yep.
is you learn that uh, people are paying attention. That's what you learn.
Mhm.
Like, you learn that, like when you have done your duty for a long time, that, like, people care about that, right? And like, for example, as an investor, if I see someone like Gabby, who's been like surviving free to play gaming, mobile gaming, and early blockchain gaming, and I can tell you, early blockchain gaming was super thankless and super difficult. When I see a founder like that, like, I'm delighted and I want to invest, right? So, like, people do care, and putting in the effort matters. So I just want to send that as a kind of a final note. And getting lucky, it doesn't produce satisfaction. So, I think if you're trying to play the casino and just go Shiba and things, like, even if you hit that and you win, like, it provably, according to what I'm seeing on Twitter, has yet to produce like happy humans. So
Easy come, easy go, my friend. I
yeah,
think you and I have seen
correct.
so many times, right? It's awesome to strike the jackpot, but ultimately, without consistency, without discipline, and
It doesn't make you
without
feel safe or
it,
good.
you can't. Yeah, you lose it all eventually anyway.
Yep. Awesome. Well, good. This has been a super great show, and super appreciate your awesome commentary.
Thank you so much for having me on Miko Bits, my friend. I really enjoyed it. Probably one of my most favorite interviews ever. Thank you so much again, Miko.
Wonderful. Come back anytime.
Thank you.